Oh, what's up, boys and girls? Welcome back to another guide. Today we're going to be having a look at Phoenix Colossus versus Terran. At first we'll be going over a replay that I created against the AI. And after that we will be going over a game that Stats played against Clem in the last Nation Wars, in which he plays Phoenix Colossus. So I copied his early game build, but because their early game was so hectic, I figured I'd just play it against the AI to show how I believe it should be properly played. And then we'll have a look at how you should adapt to in-game situations. So first I'll do the build, then we'll go into the more in-depth and see what kind of responses we can have when we scout. But this will be basically if everything goes correct, we will play it exactly like this. So we just open up with standard 16 gate, 17 gas, 14 pylon obviously. We'll be opening up with a 20 nexus into a 20 cybercore. Usually I'd say you scout after gate. In this case I didn't, but it shouldn't matter too much for the build. 20 cybercore, here we go. So this is the standard 1 gate expand. Another probe 21 assimilator into 22 pylon. You can build it on the low ground, can also build it on the high ground. If you're playing Stargate it doesn't matter too much because you don't need a wall to deal with Hellions, as you have Stargate units to deal with Hellions, which is completely fine. Probe scouts. Sees a marine, goes back home. Pretty normal, all of that. The moment your pylon finishes on your natural, you should start an adapt, a stargate, and then another adapt and warp gate is what's most likely gonna happen. Sometimes if you have a lot of gas, you can get away with a warp gate first, because I didn't scout, I have a little more gas, but most of the time you'll play adapt, stargate, adapt, warp gate. Chrono boost on your second adept as well, makes it safer in case he sends a Reaper across the map, easier to deal with the Reaper. Usually there's 2 entrances for the Reaper, in this case you have this one and you have this little cliff. So you just position 1 Reaper in front of your base and you put 1 Reaper on top of the cliff. After your second adept finishes, you want to start up your third adept as soon as possible. And the moment your Stargate finishes, you start with a Phoenix. Now, there's a couple of things you can do with your first Phoenix. You can use it to scout around your base for any kind of starport proxy, perhaps. You can use it to scout your opponent's base, but you can also save them up. Saving them up is a little more risky, especially if you save up till like 3 or 4. But if you get away with it, you might be able to do a lot of damage because your opponent doesn't know what kind of tech you have. However, if your tech gets spotted, so if your opponent sees you have a Stargate, always send your Phoenix across the map. In general, I'd recommend doing that, but every now and then, maybe save up till 3 or 4 Phoenixes and should be fun. So after we start our second Phoenix, or after we start our first Phoenix, we get a pylon, then we start our second Phoenix, and then once we get money with continuous probe production, we add 2 extra gateways in our main base. We can also add them into our natural. Honestly doesn't matter too much where you put your gateways. Like I said, once you have Phoenixes, you should be able to defend most things, so you don't really need a wall to deal with the Hellions, for example. Now, we start a third Phoenix the moment our second Phoenix finishes, and then we build a robotics facility as well as 2 extra assimilators and a pylon. I forget the pylon a little bit here, so I got a slight supply block, but we'll pretend like I'm not going to be supply blocked. The moment your third Phoenix finishes, you build a 4th Phoenix. You go into your gases. And at this point, usually I like to have scouted at this point already. There's 2 things that can happen. So if you see that your opponent is playing a 3-Rex opener without a factory, what I'd suggest is you get a Nexus, a Robo Bay, and an Immortal, and you don't get a 5th Phoenix. You stay on 4 Phoenixes, and you add a battery in this base, you add a battery in this base, and you just start warping in units from 3 gates while continuing worker production, adding a Colossus, and basically until you see a starport go down, you won't add a Forge or a Twilight. Now the reason you want to get as many units is because he'll attack as soon as possible. So you'll need an Immortal, you'll need 1 Sentry, probably some extra Zealots. Once your Robo Bay finishes, you can start your Colossus, but most of the time they'll push before your first Colossus is out, if it's just 3 racks without a factory and starport. If it's just a standard factory build, or a triple CC, play exactly as I'm playing right here, where the moment your robotics facility finishes, you get a Robo Bay, you have your 5th Phoenix on the way, and your first unit from the robotics facility will be an observer, which you will send across the map. Then you keep a second observer at home. Now, of course, if you scout with your phoenixes and you see a tech lab on a starport and you see it researching cloak, keep your first observer at home. You don't need to scout that badly. You have phoenixes to do that for you. So yeah, like I said, second observer. At this point, Forge, Twilight, stay on 5 phoenixes, and then the moment your Robo Bay finishes, you start your first Colossi. And you see how little extra units I'm building. It's because I know from a factory opener, the fastest attack that can hit might be 6 minutes or 6:20, something around that time usually. So I don't need to have anything before that. Now, the priority on what we're building is we get +1. We can get blink or charge. I prefer getting charge. Most of the time you can also get armor. It doesn't matter too much, as you have your army will consist mainly of zealots and colossi. Colossi benefit mainly from attack upgrades. Zealots benefit from armor upgrades. So depends on you what you want there and how you want to play the rest of the game. So you want your Forge upgrade, your Twilight upgrade, your second Colossi, and then if you have gas left over, you start your extended thermal lens. So second Colossi, then I'll have gas again, extended thermal lens. And this is the point where I can start thinking about resuming Phoenix production, if I want to. So right now I have 5 Phoenixes. I could be happy with that, but some people like to get 8 Phoenixes, easier to kill drops with. If you're not getting more Phoenixes, you can get a faster sentry perhaps. I'd also recommend getting a battery at your third base. Always helps with their early game pushes. And adding 3 gateways after you start your second Colossi. And I think that is basically the basics of this build. Once we're in the stats replay, we're gonna go deeper into exactly what you should be doing with your units and what kind of transitions you have. But for the main part, the skeleton of this build will be this opener. You're safe on 3 bases, you got your 6 gases, you have a bunch of Phoenix for map control. You can build some pylons over here for map vision. And then if a drop or 2 drops go there, you can probably clean it up with your 6-7 Phoenixes that you have. So yeah, it should be in a pretty good position. So let's hop into the stats replay and I'll explain more there. Alright boys, welcome in the game between Clem and Stats. As we see, Stats' opener is basically the same as we just did. Perhaps his gates are a little later, but that's all okay. Now, Stats decides to keep all of his Phoenixes at home, which in this case doesn't work out too well. Clem already knows about the Stargate, so keeping your Phoenixes at home doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, Clem already has the correct units in position. He has a Cyclone, he has a Vikings, even getting a second Viking. See the robotics facility coming down. And the things you can do with these Phoenixes are, well, obviously you can try to damage. If you can hide it, you can try to do some damage in one of the bases, preferably the main, as usually that one is empty. But if you are playing against something like this, like a 1-1-1 push basically with a Cyclone, 2-3 Vikings, it's really nice to have one Adept out on the map. This one Adept will tell you exactly when your opponent is moving out, and it will give you a warning. And the moment you see a move out or something aggressive, you basically halt the rest of your plan. So you won't get your Forge, you won't get your Twilight, you won't get your Robobay. Instead, you will just do another warp in of units and you add another Phoenix. So you just continue unit production. In general, whenever a Terran is being aggressive, you want to cut your future tech for something that will help you in the short run. So you're not going to add gateways, you just want to add another warp in or something like that. So it's the same as, again, it's basically a 3 barracks opener. If you see something like this, you see him move out, you're like, well, you know what? If I see him move out at 4:33 at this point with an Adept, I might lose the Adept. I can warp in 3 extra units. Then the time for him to walk all the way over here to your ramp, you have time for another extra 3 units, which means you have 6 extra units, which is a lot easier to defend a push like that if you're, if you have 6 extra units to deal with it. Another thing you can do if you have Phoenixes, which is really strong, especially if they get a sieged position, is that you can pick off reinforcements really easily. So if Stats was aware of this push, he could just be around the back line of Clem's army, maybe try to lift this a tank, try to pick off this Viking, or try to pick off a rallying marine. Hell, he could even go for mules on his opponent's base, you know, to try and delay his economy behind this. Stats, however, isn't really ready for that, so we see him at the third base, gets an observer, Robo Bay, and he sees it extremely late what's happening. He's like, oh dang. If you see a push as it arrives at your base, unless your name is Stats, most of the time you're not going to hold it, which is why I usually advocate for having one adept or even a probe over here, or just scouting with your phoenixes also kind of tends to help. Now let's speed up through this little push, as it's not that important, but we really want to see the follow-up he has after this early game. He needs to pull workers, this isn't ideal. He still gets in an okay position because of some, I believe to be slight mismicro by Clem. But this is all playable. So once we're stable, what we want to be doing is we want to add a second forge so we can continue our upgrades. Stats adds a second robotics facility. You can also add a Templar Archives, go into Storm or into Archon and play Phoenix Archon Colossus or Phoenix Storm Colossus. You can also add a second robo, either for Disruptors or for Immortals. Both is fine. There's a lot of different variations which you can follow up with. He's even getting War Prism speed, which is kind of wild. You want to get a fort base. Basically, whenever you feel safe and you have more than 6 gateways, you want to be getting a fort base as soon as possible. You always want to be up a base against Terran the majority of the time, or at least ahead in taking your base. So we see the Templar Archives coming down as well, a big gateway count influx, and this is really how you want to be transitioning out of it. You see how active he is with the Phoenixes as well, in combination with this Observer. Well, he can pick off this mine, he can pick off reinforcements that are coming in. He probably could even go for maybe a marine over here, but decides to go away. And with that, once again, with that observer vision, this kind of harass is really quite safe. Another nice thing to do, which Stats isn't quite doing, like I mentioned before, is getting a pylon here, a pylon here. So you really get good vision, and even if your Phoenixes aren't in position to deal with the drop, so if your Phoenixes aren't here, but there's a drop here, you can still see it. You can recall to that base, and your Phoenixes will be able to deal with it. Medevacs can't really escape away from Phoenixes. So we see the fort base going down, extra zealots, multiple upgrades. We see +1 attack being a priority over the armor as well. So +1's already done, and we'll go for +2. So even though your army mainly consists of zealots, I really do believe that the +1 attack is slightly better. And a quick little tip, if you see a Terran that is on 4 gas, so not on 6 gas, most of the time that means they're gonna all in. So in that case, just stay defensive, don't attack. Maybe add 1 or 2 batteries. Just do anything to make sure that you don't die, and you should be fine. And with that, I think that pretty much closes out this part of the guide. The rest of the game, Clem attacks and Stats defense, is not too interesting. You can transition into Storm later on. You can transition into Disruptors that Stats is doing as well. I like an Archon into Disruptor transition, and then perhaps later on, once Liberators hit the fields, you can add some Tempest. But this is a solid defensive setup. This kind of opener will get you into longer games a lot of the time. It's relatively safe. It's kind of easy to play. The army is easy to control, as there's not a lot of spellcasters here. And you get to do stuff with Phoenixes, which in my opinion is always fun. So this will be it for today. If you enjoyed this guide, feel free to like, subscribe, and all that kind of stuff. I also stream every day on Twitch from about 12 at noon till 5 p.m. Central European time, so check that out as well, twitch.tv/Harstem, and I'll see you boys either there or at the next YouTube video. Bye bye.